Okay, good evening. It's 7:32 on Tuesday, May 16th, 2023. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Finance to order. First item on every agenda is always public comment. Given that we don't have any members of the public in our audience today, I mean, we have a relatively light agenda. Jen, have we received any by email?
No.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next item. We have sort of four primary action discussion items on our agenda tonight. The first one is to discuss the Board of Finance representative to the Great Island Advisory Committee. I'll kick things off here. The Board of Selectmen discussed and passed a resolution to create an advisory committee that'll initially have sort of a one-year term, but I think they expect it'll sort of last, for many years beyond that. And as part of that, they assigned two members of the Board of Selectmen, the chair of the Board of Finance or one of his designees, the moderator of the RTM or one of their designees, not P and Z, right, Jen? Correct. And then four members of the general public. The Board of Selectmen, I think, have appointed John and Mike Burke as their two representatives. I know the RTN held an election, and Mark Avaletta is going to serve as their initial representative. From the Board of Finance's perspective, I think I've maybe spoken to a few of you, but in terms of, I was going to, it's either myself or someone that I would recommend, and I would obviously kind of solicit all your input, but I was going to make the suggestion and offer that I think at least for the initial time period for the next, for this first wave, I was going to, given that there's no other building committees or committees I'm really actively serving on now, I was going to recommend that I serve as a Board of Finance representative, just given that there's a lot of things in connection with like the recent sales, some of the other negotiations that are going on right now. I think it would, speaking with Monica, she thought it would be helpful at least in the initial sort of wave here of whether that's 3, 4, 5, 6 months, I would serve as that representative. And I think as we transition from these sort of initial opening it up and dealing with some of the other issues that that we've all discussed, and we get into more of the building out and developing of the next 1, 2, 5, 10, 30 years, probably makes sense to find one of you all to take over as a representative there. So if you guys are supportive of that, I've spoken to I think Dave Martin about that, and Taylor as well. So
yeah, I'm good with it, Chip.
So moved.
okay, and I'll obviously like this to keep you guys all up to date.
Do we have to have a vote just to formalize it? I have no problem with it.
I think in a technical sense, it's the Board of Finance
Yep.
chair or the chair's designee.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't think we need a vote, but I'll definitely obviously keep you guys updated.
Makes
and I
total
think,
sense.
Okay.
When is when are we kicking off? When we start? Generally, that kind of.
So I know at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, I think they indicated they collected, was it 27 applications? Or
It sounds about right, because I think applications were due by the end of April, I think.
yeah. They've gotten between like 25 and 30 applications, and I think the Board of Selectmen, including last night, have been interviewing. They've had one or two other meetings, sort of 5 or so a pop per night. I think both in person and or on Zoom and so forth. So I think it's probably a couple more weeks until they get through. I mean, I think it's great that we've had a ton of residents, step forward and be willing to kind of serve and do all the work that comes with it. So I imagine they'll probably set it in the next couple weeks and get things cracking then.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay. So then the next item is item 2 is to discuss and consider action on the first selectman's salary for next term. Every 2 years, the Board of Finance, which is officially the budget-making authority of the town, has to set the first selectman's salary And it becomes active, Jen, when the first selectman is next elected.
Right, after the election,
Yeah,
it
so it's like
becomes,
effective like the second or third week in November.
right,
So we're actually setting it for whoever the next first selectman is. And again, this is done sort of every 2 years. You know, a little bit of history here. I think when I first moved to town, and many of you were here before me, this was sort of an unpaid position going back like 20 plus years, right? And it was also sort of a part-time position. And then I think as sort of time went on, it became a salaried and more of a full-time job. And then it was, I know when it was occupied by Dave Campbell, I think he donated back all or much of his salary and so forth. And then as it kind of transitioned to Jamie, I feel like it becomes more and more of a full-time job year after year. But every other year we've looked at it and we set it, relative to, I think some of the inputs have been, what are we doing with overall salaries on the town side? What do we see in terms of how does Darien look competitive to our other towns as it relates to size, number of employees, number of staff that the first selectman uses and so forth, and overall sort of cost of living and so forth. So, Jen worked with Susan, right?
right, yeah, Susan compiled all of this.
So this is Susan, who heads our sort of HR department, pulled all this together. So, and this is all available in the packet that's online, right, Jen?
Right. And just to put in perspective where the town increases are for next year, we only have 2 contracts that are settled for next year. PD is at 2.75%, the town hall union is at 2.5%, and then the PD for fiscal '25 is at 3.125%. Town hall will be in negotiations for that year.
And I know on the Board of Ed side, the negotiations on the administrator's contract, that was done a year ago. Those were sort of in the 2.25%, 2.5%, and the teachers all in were, on average, it was a blended about 3.5%, 3.6% per year.
One question I had here is how can we value the benefit of a pension, being part of a pension program, which is our first selectman is? Do you know what the terms of the pension are? Is it percentage of the?
It's
For how long?
2% of average final 3-year salary for each year of service.
2% per year of
Yeah.
service.
Isn't there a 5-year vesting period?
Yes,
So it doesn't, okay, but it's earned but not vested until
Correct,
5 years?
right.
yes.
Okay.
So when you vest, you'll get 10% of your average.
Last
So-
3 years
Last
average
years.
salary.
So first selectman in 3 terms would earn 6% of his or her.
12%. 3 terms would be 6 years.
Times, right, 12% of the, say that again?
It's 2.5%.
It's the average of the 3 highest years' salary of the last 5 years, which is pretty much your last 3 years.
Got it. Okay, that's how you value it. Thank you.
And it's 5-year cliff vesting, right?
Yes,
Which is also what we've done with
with the DC,
the DC plans.
right,
2% or 2.5% for each year?
2%.
So when you say cliff, it vests, 100% of it vests on the 5th anniversary date?
Yep,
Yeah, so if they left after 2 terms, they will have accrued, 4 years, like 8%, but then they wouldn't actually be into the pension program.
right. You get a return of contributions with a 1% annual interest.
And is that in perpetuity?
The pension?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So that example, 12% of 142, 14, call it 17,000, it would be 17,000 a year in perpetuity, starting on the 5th anniversary date. 5th anniversary date of when it's first earned.
Correct.
Right, so okay, yep.
And I think when you look at the defined contribution plans that we have in town, Jen, right, those are all 5% match. So the employee is required to contribute 5%. The town matches 5%. But again, the town's match doesn't vest until after 5 years, obviously, the employees does. And so what I would say is, if you look at this column here, just one thing I would point out is that while there are some yeses and nos on the pension side, virtually all of those that are nos or have defined contribution plans, with the exception of Wilton, which has neither. I think Greenwich, for example, I think has moved all of their non-certified, like non-teacher pensions over to defined contributions and so forth now.
What was the most recent, agreement on compensation here? What was it?
The police department.
No, I'm sorry, on the first selectment. What did we agree to 2 years ago? When we
What
last
was
looked at
the
this?
increase? I don't think it was a percent. I think we did a flat dollar amount.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I thought it was in the
I'm thinking-
2.75, I thought, to 3% area.
I thought we did like 5,000.
Yeah, I thought we
I
did a
think
flat
you're
rate.
right,
like that.
Jen, I think you're
I
right.
think we did.
That is what we did.
Let me, yeah, I can pull up minutes.
The base salary looks like it's a little bit on the light side, but that's why I was trying to value the pension, right?
And the pension does have a 5% employee contribution.
So in that case, the employee puts in 5% of their salary, and the town contributes whatever is actuarially determined to be the,
Correct.
And when did they start getting the pension?
Upon retirement.
What's retirement? Is there a specific
There's
age?
a rule of 80. If your
Oh.
combined years of service and age
Percentage.
equals 80, it can be a normal retirement with no reduction. There's a few categories.
how does it work for a town employee that is also elected? Things like the tax collector or first selectman,
They are just elected officials.
but in terms of collecting the pension, if they just like step down, they only serve like 2, 4, 6, 8 terms or something, is that considered retirement?
I'm not sure. I don't know if there is a clause in there that treats them separately, because it hasn't happened since I've been here. So, what we did last time, we did a $5,000 increase.
That, by the way, a $5,000 increase is exactly 3.5% on the current number, just for,
So there was discussion of an increase between $5,000 and $10,000.
yep.
So it's 3.6% last year, right, because it was one.
Yeah.
It was
Well, 2 years ago,
137.5.
you said it at
Or two-
142.5, and it did not increase with the second year of the term. You said it at 142.5 for the full term.
For the full term.
Right, you do have the option, you can say so much in the first year of the term, and then you can also put an increase for
And
the
these are
second year.
2-year
if you want.
terms?
Yes.
So this would be effective
November
upon
of
the-
'23.
Yeah, November.
So I guess when I look at this, I think a couple of things that I think are most important. I look at the total population of kind of, who you answer to, if you will. I look at the total number of townside employees at, 166, and then from our side, although the library is not technically our town, but it is a budget that we have to sort of fund, and we do have, I think, close to 200 volunteer firemen, which are not included in there, but towns like New Canaan and Greenwich, their fire departments obviously are kind of included in there. And then I look at, sort of the staff, like not, let me find the column right here. So if you look at like the antepenultimate, like the town manager, some have a sort of chief of staff, a town administrator. effectively, Kate Bush's role, and some do not.
I don't know how you want to do this, but I mean, just to have a conversation starter, I would propose a $5,000 bump in each of the next 2 years. Take 142.5 to 147.5, which is a 3.5% increase, and then another 5,000 on top of that. I haven't done the math, but it'll be something on 3% or so increase. That seems consistent with the contracts, and it gets that salary to 152.5, which feels a little bit more in sync with pure towns.
Yes, I think
I
historically.
think it's $7,500. I started with, that's a 5.5% increase. That seems a little bit out of whack with the way other town employees are seeing bumps.
Yeah, and I also think when I look at some of these towns, I think the further you get down into the southwestern part of the state, I mean, just adjusting for things like cost of living and so forth, all.
I think Dan's proposal is fair. I don't have any issues with that.
And Jen, in terms of, we didn't factor in any specific increase, right, to the budget?
We factor in some additional funds into the employee salary set aside because you have to set this salary and then the Board of Selectmen also have to set the other elected official salaries.
Is this kind of consistent with where your head is?
Yeah, I mean, I would support 5,000 per year for each of the 2 years. I think it's important. I mean, listen, not only our first selectman, I think, all of our sort of department heads and so forth. I know we're looking at that as well and so forth. I think it's important that we compensate our, whether it's elected or department heads, competitively.
As long as we never have to do the by hour calculation, because we'd probably be under the minimum wage.
That is true. That is true.
So is that roughly double what the selectman was paid for the previous 2 years?
Yeah, last year was a $5,000 one-time increase, so it went from 137.5 to 42 and state.
It just seems like we're a little bit on the low end compared to like towns. I'm looking at New Canaan, I'm looking at Westport, Greenwich. I know Greenwich is different, but Westport's at 150, New Canaan is at 155.
And New Canaan's going to 171 after the next election.
New Canaan's going to 171.
171 after the next election, it says here.
Okay.
And just a point of clarification, I went back and looked at the packet from 2 years ago. The salary was at 135, so and the proposal was to raise it 5, but you decided to raise it 7,500.
Okay.
And that was for the 2 years of the term.
So 10,000 over 2 years versus 7,500 over 2 years.
That's what we did last time.
Yeah.
7,500, yeah.
Cool. Any other discussion on this?
No, I think it's a fair assessment. It's a fair way of looking at it. Want to stay competitive,
Sounds
and
fair.
Yeah.
New Canaan's getting bumped to 171.
Do we vote?
Is the first selectman on a defined benefit plan, pension plan?
Yes.
Will that change at some point in the future, going out?
So I think there is as you know, we've moved 2 of our town collective bargaining units over to defined compensation plans. The civilian dispatchers, while they're not a separate sort of negotiating plan, they're sort of with the police department, but they're part of the town hall plan. They're in a defined compensation plan, so I kind of call that like 2.5 employee units. And then the school security officers, the 6 that the Board of Ed recently hired, are all on defined compensation plans. So,
Well, once again, is there a plan to to convert this from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution?
I think, there's certainly, there's been a move to kind of move all of the collective bargaining units over, and I think as you look at sort of, the overall staff, I think that's that's certainly something I think we could and should include. I mean, right now, all of the changes that have been made so far are for new employees coming in. I don't think you can really change existing employees, so I actually think that's the right approach to do it for new employees, because switching everybody at once, if you were to switch all the existing employees, which you can't do, but that would actually create a large match for the town, and it would actually stop new employee contributions to the pension. So that sort of significant of a changeover would actually, I think, be more expensive in the short term. I think the new employee route is a better route. But I do think, John, that's something we should discuss, I think as we talk about summer projects.
Well, my own thought without splitting hairs is simply that if the anticipated benefits from a defined benefit plan typically have been significantly higher than they will for a defined contribution plan, and it wouldn't hurt to factor that into the discussion in terms of whether 5,000 a year is enough.
Yeah, well, I think, right now, I don't think we can change the existing first selectman once you're in.
Right. That's been the practice.
Yeah.
Technically you can, but it's inadvisable.
So when does her term end?
Well,
November.
this November.
That's my point.
So I guess the question
Term
is,
then, isn't she effectively then re-elected and rehired?
No,
no.
no, it's continuous service under
Okay.
the plan.
Okay.
So I do think it's something we should talk about. I don't know that we can really change it.
I agree with you, that's fine, I understand.
But I think we should look at it in connection with all the other discussions
Well, if
we'll
we
have.
do, if she does move, or he or she does move to a defined contribution plan in the future, then the next conversation around compensation should reflect that. But
Yes.
this one is sounds like we just haven't
Yeah,
gotten there yet.
yeah.
Right.
Although, in a technical sense, the salary that we're setting is for whoever the next first
Yeah,
selectman is.
exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So. Okay.
What would be, I'm sorry, not to split another hair another way, but in fact, would the time to have that conversation be upon the election of a new first selectman, when, if it wasn't the existing first selectman, we would strongly consider defined contribution plan for that person?
Well, yeah, Jen, who actually makes a decision around,
If we were to move non-reps and elected officials,
Yeah.
or to have that discussion,
new non-reps?
right. I imagine it would be brought to the Board of Selectmen. Because there's not a contract, there's no requirement for it to go through all of the boards. And the Board of Selectmen set the pay plan for non-represented employees. So I believe that they would have the authority, although thinking about it, it would also be, I guess, an amendment to the pension plan, which would require all the boards. I don't know.
Well, that's if we're amending the plan. I think right now,
But,
the
so the
DC
plan,
is a
but the plan
eligible
says
plan.
that it designates or, defines who is eligible and must participate in the plan. If you are eligible, you must participate. That is superseded by negotiation with the union contracts, but I believe that for the non-representatives who are only covered by the plan document, it would have to be an amendment to the plan,
You'd have to, right.
which then would require all of the boards, I think.
Well, it's something as we get to the next point, you know, and I solicited some input from the Board of Ed and sort of others on things that we may want to work on this summer, and I think that's one that we should definitely drill down in and kind of get answers to these, I think, to kind of help all of our boards map out a path. 'Cause it does seem like this is the way that things are moving for new employees.
Okay,
So, well noted, and we'll add that to the list a little bit later on. So I'll entertain a motion to adopt a $5,000 increase to the first selectman's salary to move to $147,500 beginning, I guess, this November, Jen? And then $152,500 beginning in the following November.
Moved.
Dan moves,
Second.
Paul seconds. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Okay, next item is to discuss board finance topics to be reviewed this summer. And so this was, as you know, our workload tends to be a little bit light over the summer, so we've certainly taken on certain projects, and usually a subset of the board will kind of focus on different ones, you know, working with Jen and whatever other groups that we need to kind of think about these all in preparation for, you know, kind of thinking about them now rather than at budget time. So a few items, I'm happy to kind of kick things off. Bear with me one second. Okay. Pardon me. Dan, you don't have to, do you have the email up from Jill?
From Jill,
Yeah.
right? I can find it. Here.
Okay, so I'm going to kick things off with a few things I've discussed with like the Board of Ed, and I think things that would be helpful for us to look at in connection with them. One was, you know, number one was exploring the defined contribution plans for all the town different boards. You know, the school has two different union groups, the teachers and the administrators, which are both covered underneath the state plan. So we technically do not pay for their retirement plan, although it does show up on the balance sheet, right, Jen?
Yes, because we get a on behalf payment from the state.
Yeah. But all of their other groups, which namely include like things like the cafeteria workers, nurses, paraprofessionals, janitors, groundskeepers, and so forth like that, all have their own employee bargaining units, as well as there are a few in town. So I think one of the things that I think would be helpful for us as we've, I think, kind of formulated, you know, a discussion here in town about working with our town labor groups to move into the defined compensation plan. I think it would be helpful to sit down, I think, with the Board of Ed to discuss how, to discuss their approach and their openness to moving some of their employee groups. I think some of it, I think, will be a little bit of learning on my part. I know like they are responsible for setting the actual salaries and negotiating the contracts, and those contracts on their side don't need Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, or RTM approval, but they do participate in the town's pension plan. So there is sort of, you know, connectivity there, and I think it'll be helpful for us to talk with them on that. So that would be one item.
Well, I would say benefit plans generally then. So benefit plans, benefit versus contribution, town and school, right? That's like one working group, right?
Yes. And maybe what I'll do is I'll send this list around after this meeting, and everyone can maybe tell me what they might be interested in, you know, kind of focusing on. I do think, you know, dividing things up just like we do the budget is helpful. The other thing that I had mentioned, and I think you guys have heard me talk about this a few times, is, you know, healthcare, which is kind of 15% or so of all of our operating budgets and so forth. You know, I think on the town side and on the Board of Ed side, they've both done good jobs in the face of extremely large increases, either looking at the state plan or renegotiating or negotiating inside of and on the Board of Ed side, they are part of sort of a collective, if you will. But I do think, you know, one of the things that's been brought up, and I know New Canaan looks at it and so forth, is some type of self-insurance, some type of first loss.
Yep.
And I think given, you know, we obviously carry a very healthy reserve in the general fund, right? To maintain our rating and all the necessary liquidity. We've collapsed a lot of our reserves, you know, into that. But I think it'd be helpful to sit down and look holistically, including if that involves bringing a consultant in, to really think about what are the benefits of something such as some type of self-insurance, what are the costs, what have the expectations of other districts been?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that's very important if we go self-insurance to any degree is our HIPAA concerns, to make sure that in fact when somebody makes a claim, that their claim is entirely confidential. And all we deal with is the money, not the nature of the claim.
And I think usually there is an administrator that you're working with, so it's really just risk slices that you're negotiating with the insurance company in terms of where you kind of come in and so forth. But I think it's I think it's something we should look at, and I know there's been some conversation on the Board of Ed side. Everyone has kind of historical experience, but I feel like things are changing rapidly. I don't know, Jen, if you have a position of what we've seen in other towns, but I feel like given how big it is, it's something we really.
Yeah, we have our healthcare consultant looking at it on a periodic basis. And when we look back, some years it would have benefited us, some years it wouldn't. I think one thing that, if we explore this, we'll have to maybe come up with a budget stabilization method, whether it's seeding the internal service fund with some fund balance or something to stabilize that budget. Kate and I have talked about that a little bit. But yeah, it's always something that we should be looking at, because especially if we have the town and the Board of Ed, it could be a large enough one that it does benefit more often than not.
And would it make sense to, like, you know, bring the library into it? I mean, it's not a lot of employees, but is that a?
They're not town employees, so I would caution against bringing them into our plan.
That's right.
Hey Jen, how long has our relationship been with the healthcare consultant that we've used?
It predates me. I've been here 7.5 years, and I think it was a lengthy relationship before that.
And who is it?
Locked in?
It's always worth exploring this self-insurance option. It's not a whole lot of work involved.
When I was working, it was a constant effort all year long.
Yep.
John, you had sent a few, which apparently my inbox is not syncing up here. Here we go. I have a few others here. Okay.
Well, the first one was putting Great Island finances under some formal control and
That's right. Try,
getting the monthly information and so on, and being able to understand what monies are coming in and going out, and under whose control, and how's the money being raised, how's it being spent, just all the usual budgetary controls and concerns.
yeah, I think right now we temporarily have a system in place where rents that we collect kind of go into a special revenue fund, is it, Jen? And then they can cover expenses out of that. But I think as this becomes, as the leases are expected to kind of roll off and the expenses are expected to increase, that's not going to work sort of long-term. That was a short-term solution. So I think, listen, in connection with the advisory commission ramping up and deciding sort of what the next steps are, I do agree we should really think about that as really understand kind of what the budgets are. Because I think there will be capital decisions coming in front of us, and I think we really need to understand what are the operating expense implications there.
Right, yep, it's a good idea.
And then I think, I'm not sure if you all got to attend or watch the May 11th meeting on the first study.
May 11th of what? Which meeting?
It was actually the
The
Public Works held a meeting
Public
where
Works
they
meeting. Right,
discussed
right,
the
drainage
results
study,
of the
drainage-
salt box.
the salt
leak.
box drainage study.
Right. So I think that that's definitely something that everyone should put on their watch list. The meeting was about an hour and I think 30 hour and 45 minutes long, and it talked about it's a big project that's ultimately going to need to come in front of the town.
And Jim, as
Why
they
did
cautioned
I
us
did
over
not-
and over, that project is only a part of the town's challenges with flood control, so we need to begin to get behind and understand exactly what the total scope is of possible flood.
Don't we have
problems.
3 drainage studies, and this was just the first?
Yes.
And the cost was 4 times what we thought it was going to be.
Yeah. There was Salt Box, there was the Grove Street one, which,
Yeah, Tilly Pond, Grove
Yeah.
Street, yeah, that waterway, and there was a third. There was a third.
Baker,
I don't remember what the third was.
yeah. So I think we should look at that. We should begin to think about like these big projects in terms of prioritization, in terms of timing, in terms of overall expense. And I do think it's, given that this is something new and possibly substantial maybe in front of us, we should maybe think about from a policy perspective, how should we approach the town's expenditures on things such as this?
Yeah.
And this rolls into some of the discussions that we've had previously on the FEMA, on acquisitions of properties that benefit from the FEMA kind of buyout clause.
So this drainage study could actually be part of, because I know, John, you've asked multiple times, when are we going to have a policy around flooding, right? And acquisition of property, and that's been elusive. So this could be, developing a policy could be part of this working group, stimulating that conversation.
Yeah. I think these ultimately projects that the Board of Selectmen will put forward, but I think they ultimately need to come to us. So I think having some conversations among our board and beginning to think about policy, I think in talking with them, so they know how we think about it, I think will help them better kind of plan how they think about it. Because although, listen, we're different bodies in terms of independent, in terms of approving these, I do think it makes sense to have a general town consensus in terms of what we're doing.
I have a couple. As the Board of Ed is revising their budget process, I think we ought to, obviously, they take the lead on that discussion, but we ought to make sure that we're present at some of that conversation, just so we understand kind of how we are to interact with the Board of Ed in the next budget cycle. And make sure that our perspective is shared appropriately as they try to tack in a different manner as to how they're gonna manage their budget discussions. I know last year's was unwieldy. It was very efficient, but it was a little bit unwieldy on the front end with a number of constituents that were lobbing questions in, and I think that's part of why they wanted to modify their process.
Well, maybe we could break this up into two different projects. One is kind of how we'll interact with the Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen, right? In terms of giving them comments, because I do think it's helpful to hear those individual boards talk with their staff about what their priorities are and so forth. And let that percolate for a little bit before, I'm not sure us kind of nudging our way right in
Agreed.
there in the first conversation.
Yeah, Super Saturday is, everybody should be in listen mode, and maybe for another meeting or two as they hash
Yeah.
all of that information around, right? And then there's an appropriate time for us and F&B and Education Committee to weigh in, and maybe it's been a little bit too early for their taste.
Correct.
Right.
You know, I agree with you. I certainly agree with you in practice. In theory, what I found was awkward, if we want to use that word, is having a discussion occur, having the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education approve a particular budget item that we would have questions about, and having to therefore peel back the onion again and then open it up and ask those questions it's not optimal,
Right.
even though it may be the one way that the process can work.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the Board of Ed side, there were some things that are, again, it's first the superintendent's budget and it's the town administrator's budget.
Right, yeah.
So I think hearing the respective boards react to those top-level staff recommendations and beginning to see where those boards, because if they don't favor something, it's really not worth our time asking 15 questions about item X if their board isn't really supporting it. I mean, listen, we should be following it, right, to make sure it's something that we should be spending on, right, or not spending money on. But I think it's good to let it percolate. Maybe we can think about the calendar. Where is the right spot for us to insert ourselves
Right. Yes.
to those boards when they're developing their budgets? Because it is incumbent on, we shouldn't be cutting something from their budget without giving them some input after they've had time to really think about it. Like the change we made to the Board of Ed budget was really a change in the revenue,
Right.
even though we cut their appropriation by $100,000. It was really in response to a change in the revenue, which was known after the fact.
Right, yes.
Right, so that's different, sort of when things like healthcare expenses at the library and building permit, that's a little bit different, but expenditures, we should be, I don't know if it's halfway through or 2/3 of the way through, but
I also think on the town side that the partner buddy system is kind of maybe worn out its welcome a little bit, because I think there's a disconnect to some degree on what people think the purpose of it is. And I think our understanding is it's simply to consolidate questions to minimize the time on town staff responding to questions, multiple questions, redundant questions. I think some believe it's an opportunity for us to all get on the same page. That if an individual, whether it's us or someone on an RTM committee, has an issue with an expense, it's an opportunity to have that conversation before we meet as a board. And I don't remember that that's the purpose of it. I thought it was just to consolidate questions. The other thing is that a lot of these committees are following these departments, month to month. And a lot of what I saw in this budget cycle, where they didn't have any questions, because any questions they had were long answered. And they were like, you can ask us questions, So I think we ought to look at it and just make sure we are all on the same page as to what the utility of it is for and what the scope of the conversation is meant to be.
It's a really good point.
so maybe I kind of see three categories in the budget right now. I think one, how we provide our input to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education, and we'll figure out the right time to kind of thread that in. I think it would also be helpful for us to make sure that we think about our schedule and when we want to solicit sort of formal input from the RTM on items that they want us to sort of reflect in how we're developing the budget. Because while they do have the ability to like cut A or cut B, there's a lot of the construction of the budget that takes place at this table that then can't be sort of deconstructed or reconstructed on the RTM side. So I think what we should have is we should make clear to them, like have meetings where, and make sure that they know this is what we're discussing. So if you have comments that you want us to reflect in our budget making process, which is not simply an upstream version of yours, right? It is, we do more than what they have the ability to adjust. Let's work on that. So that would be the second one. And I think the third one is on budget guidance. You know, it's been sort of 3 or 4 years now that we've been giving out guidance at the state of the town, which is usually the first Tuesday, Jen, I think in December, or Monday in December.
Monday, yeah.
You know, and I've done, the chair's generally done that, you know, with their own work and maybe a little bit of informal input from others and so forth. But I think we have some time over the summer. We should begin to look at, here's what our contracts are, our debt service, other anticipated expenses, and in the whole environment. I do like the idea of giving the idea of core growth, which just reflects, you know, things like known budget increase, known salary increases. You know, employee X will make 2.5% more next year than this year. But then in terms of other expenses, I think it's helpful on the non-core, like the growth aspect of it.
Controllable versus non-controllable,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
So let's work as a board to try to formalize that process and deliver it earlier, because the, as crazy as it sounds, like the Board of Ed starts, you know, the superintendent and his team start making the budget in late September and into October, and those books are already printed by the first week of December. So it's a little bit late. Now, it's not too late for the Board of Ed, because they then review it, but I do think it'd be helpful to be out there earlier, so both senior staff members on the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed side could react to that.
The other one I had is the,
Oft-discussed fire commission, and finding a way for, I think, respective town boards to be more present as those decisions are being made on capital, principally on capital. I know we don't, yeah, so I'll leave it at that.
Well, Dan, I agree with you, and I think there's this recent emergency services analysis and report that was recently completed, and in theory will be implemented by the town. It would be good to understand what the financial implications of those changes are, maybe efficiencies and so on, and that includes the fire commission.
Exactly, yes. Yes.
The last thing I had was just questions about ARPA. What's the status of ARPA is? And I thought I had heard that the money hadn't been spent as quickly as it might have, and that there were semi-unutilized funds, if not unallocated. Does it make sense to review that? And
We're reconvening, it's being reconstituted and reconvened, right?
okay,
But I haven't heard, I think, still under John Zagrodzky's leadership, but I haven't heard of
I haven't
when,
heard a schedule or anything yet.
of a schedule. Particularly in the wake of the salt box study, where we had, I think, $1.5 million earmarked out of ARPA funds, not for the study, but to actually address the situation. And if it's 6 million, then we would pull that 1.5 out and find another way to fund the 6, freeing up 1.5 of ARPA money for other purposes, but also examining everything within ARPA, making sure we have a true up. We have to commit it by the end of
2024.
2024. So.
Spend by
And
26.
spend by 2026, which does implicate some of these drainage projects, because actually having all of the dollars spent by the end of 2026 would be probably unrealistic, especially with some of these studies we don't even have back yet, given the scale of the project. Probably and the permits that would be required at the state or otherwise, right? So we may, so yes, so that's, we are reconvening, but no date set as yet.
I think that'll be important to look at, because when you think.
I was gonna add ARPA to this, but,
Yeah. And you
that's
had mentioned
ongoing.
like that as well, because I think, the ability to use ARPA dollars and bond dollars or other capital dollars combined, I think we want to think about if the size of projects dictates that it could be bonded in its entirety, and ARPA could be used for other projects that are coming in, let's just say, next year's capital budget. I think it's important for us to think about it now as we decide sort of what dollars we use to fund.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And I think in connection with all of our summary reading should include that, I think, 200-page emergency services.
Right.
Which you guys all should have a copy of. I think, Jen, right, you get copies made, I think?
Yep.
for
Yeah,
all
I
of
think
us?
everybody got a copy.
Yeah.
Can we ask
Tom.
Ed Gentile to distribute his deck for that drainage study as well? That drainage presentation.
Good idea.
Thank you.
The one thing I have is Park and Rec Commission has offered to give us a tour, and I think we should, especially in the summer months, have a tour of our major parks, if not all of them, and to understand the issues that might be there, specifically Pear Tree Point and the work that's been there, and also some of the other work down at Weed Beach. And it was mentioned invasive plants. I'd be curious to see what those are, so I can prohibit them from killing my trees.
It seems to me that, yeah, we should add a Parks and Rec tour, and we might want to accelerate the school tour so that we've seen the schools before we're watching the Board of Ed debate about the capital that the schools require.
So that is one change that they've already proposed in, I think CE sent an email around to us with the, when you look at the new calendar, I think that's moved up to September.
Okay,
Okay.
good. Good.
So we'll do that. So I feel like school tour, Parks and Rec tour. Guess question, we did not do the fire department this year,
Yeah.
but we, do we want to do that this next year? And then the question is maybe TBD if we need to do a Great Island tour, if there are anything sort of coming up in connection with that, or maybe it's rolled in with the Parks and Rec.
I would say on the fire, it depends on whether they foresee major capital asks. And if they do, then we should go see the equipment. And if they don't, I don't know that we need to.
I would agree with you.
Yep.
I'm not sure what benefit there is to see the house again, just, every other
Yeah.
year, right?
If unless there's any big
If
projects
there's
on
a,
that
yeah,
house.
well, yeah, for example, Norotan Heights,
Yeah.
the retaining wall, maybe we should go see that, right? Because, see what kind of conditions, and I know we've already started talking about spending money there, but once we get the study back, the engineering study back, maybe we ought to go see it. It might be case by case.
So maybe the fire department tour, TBD, depending on how many sort of capital items. A couple of years ago, they were making like the sort of night rooms and office, and they were fixing the outside wall in Roten Heights. So we'll kind of watch to see what's coming down
Have
the
they done the
pipeline.
gas line at Norotan yet?
The conversion to natural gas? No, they have
I
not.
would put tours under the budget, because we're touring it as part, in anticipation of the budget, right? So that's another kind of sub-bullet under the budget. Guidance, schedule, our schedule, and our interaction with the town, school, and the RTM.
Okay. And then I'd like to add, if it's not done by then, we discussed, I think it's a couple of years now, about creating memorializing in the form of a grant, in the form of a document, the grant that the town gives to the library each year. And I guess maybe we should look at any other grants and see if that is a kind of policy we want to institute on that grant. I think there's a grant to the Historical Society. Are there any others that we need to think about?
Well, there were a lot of grants. I remember in the community, there were 7 or 8. There's the depot grant, there's a number of different grants. Probably none to the level of consequence as the library grant, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's,
Those are all kind of more annual, not the
Given Dan's comments about the flood remedial work and the dramatic surprises we've had with the cost of fire engines doubling and so on, should the CapEx projection schedule be reviewed to determine whether in fact those numbers for going out a couple of years are still reasonable, or whether in fact we're gonna end up paying a whole lot more for what we thought was gonna be X cost is now 2X, 3X.
Yeah, they should be updating that on an annual basis. I think that there was some disconnect between who was responsible for updating it and who might have a better feel for what prices are doing. So I believe when Brian was here from DFD, he committed to helping to get that trued up a bit more.
yeah, I think we should take whatever the Galveston co-op that we belong to. I mean, a lot of these are just traditional engines. We should take what those prices are today, what we're just paying, and inflate those out at kind of call it 2 to 3, whatever % per year.
Well, from the Galveston one, they get the chassis pricing, but then there can be a lot of variation based on how they outfit it. So I think it's probably more involved than just taking the Galveston pricing. I think they have to think about what the department's needs are for each of those pieces.
That's all. So much for summer vacation.
Yeah. Jen, anything you would want us to focus on?
I don't think it has to be a summer project, but one thing that I have on my radar is taking a look at how we determine the appropriate level of fund balance. We have a policy that has a minimum percentage. We've had a practice of keeping it around a certain amount, but what I'm envisioning is coming up with a list of all the things that could potentially draw on our fund balance. Estimate of worst case scenario of how much those could cost. Devastating flood, natural disaster, all kinds of things that may, draw on our fund balance. Estimating a cost to it, even assigning a likelihood that it would happen. And coming up of, this is our total potential exposure. How much do we want to keep in reserve as protection against those kinds of costs? Because even if we have a natural disaster, yes, eventually we'll get reimbursed by FEMA for some or all of it, but we got to carry those costs until years down the road when we get FEMA. So I want to kind of come up with a different framework for how we determine what is the right level of fund balance for us. We face different challenges than non-coastal towns in Connecticut, than towns and cities elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to come up with something that's kind of specific to us, the challenges we face, the potential draws, and what are we comfortable kind of self-insuring for those types of things.
Yeah, I feel like one of the bigger inputs now has just been the fact that I guess like the AA, single A threshold is around 15%, and the AA, AAA threshold is 30%, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've sort of always kept it a little bit,
17%.
it's 17, which is a little bit above the single A, AA threshold, but it's,
And
that's only one of the
But
like
there's-
9, 15 different things.
And
that
there's
come with the
also a
rating.
whole debate of, is Moody's AA around 15% because the GFOA recommended fund balance level is 2 months of operating expenses, which is 14% and change. And so people are going to that level, which then they're also ending up as AAs, and it's a chicken and egg kind of
Yeah.
thing. But we've had this discussion about fund balance at GFOA, and there is no one size fits all. So I think we need to take a little more initiative to say what's right for us and how did we get there. So that's on my list to do. I don't think it necessarily has to be a summer project, but I do think it's something that we should look at before the budget when we're deciding how much of fund balance we may contribute to the fiscal '25 budget.
Yeah, maybe one thing to take into consideration is like the Board of Ed basically just eliminated their
Yep.
their reserve or their budget
Absolutely.
control that basically went from like 300 down to 0.
Mhm.
our operating reserve has gone from 400, it's now 175, right? And we've collapsed all of these small capital items that existed all over. So it's a little bit of the unknown, but it's, how much of the smaller unknowns have popped up
Yeah.
each year.
Yeah, I think looking at historically what we've drawn from it throughout the year for, ooh, didn't think of that, or let's expedite that rather than waiting for the budget, those types of things, in addition to what are the really big items, or even just the fact that we use the fund balance to fund bondable projects before we go out and issue for them. So we need the cash to be able to do that. Otherwise, we're gonna have to change our issuing strategy.
How easy would it be for you to produce a report on the last 3 to 5 years of unexpected draws on the fund balance?
It's pretty easy.
Yeah. That's kind of normal course though, because we haven't
Right.
really, other than COVID, we really haven't had,
But when we talk about, drainage issues, we know
Right.
we have drainage issues in town. We know that the storms are becoming more severe, more frequent.
Right.
What's our potential exposure
Yeah.
on those
Yes.
types of things too?
Yes.
Maybe when we look at draws on
More
the fund
closely now,
balance,
too.
let's look at draws on our capital reserve.
Mm-hmm.
Because those
'Cause
are,
that has
those
come
are
down
like the
quite a bit, too.
smaller ones. I don't want to say smaller, less material, but they're still, they have to be funded that we've been taking out of there. I think those have been, $300,000 to $400,000 a year. So, okay. Jen, we'll try to compile this list, compare my notes with yours and so forth, and we'll send it around to everyone. Okay? And then, so the next item is to close out the parking capital projects.
So the parking capital has been a little neglected. We don't include it in or we haven't included it in the twice a year capital closeout. That's only focused on RFC and RE. But it needs to be cleaned up, and then we'll get on a cycle of including it with the RFC and RE closeouts. So Ed and I started taking a look at it. A lot of these are very old projects that predate Ed.
Oh.
So he was able to identify the top section. It's supposed to be projects to close, not to remain closed. So in the projects to close, he can confirm that those are complete. I am comfortable that the balances that show in Munis are accurate. So right now, we're looking to close out $175,000. Then down below, what we're looking to keep open right now are a few that we need to investigate. So that's the first block in the middle of the page. They're very, very old projects. And I just need to go through all of the Munis data and make sure that these balances are actually accurate. And that there's not some missing piece that maybe predates Munis or didn't get carried over. I just wasn't comfortable with some of these balances. And then in the very middle, capital projects, this will use like the Board of Finance capital reserve, where we'll close projects to that account. And if mid-year, something outside of the budget cycle, Ed needs an increase or another project, we'd move it out of here like we do the capital reserve. And then the bottom section and on the next page are active projects that DPW is still working on.
And just to clarify what you just said, or repeat what you just said, these balances being returned to the parking capital fund, not the general fund.
Correct. They stay within the parking capital.
Exactly.
And because it's specifically for that purpose, I think that's the reason it became a little bit neglected. But we gotta stay on top of it.
And Jen, just to be clear, what is the reserve? Do we close these back into a reserve?
No,
Other than that, or-
it's historically, this capital projects, the account description is capital projects. The balance is just under 1.3 million. Our lease agreements with the state require us to put a certain amount into capital every year. If Ed doesn't have enough projects that he's gonna do that year to use up everything that we have to transfer to capital, we've traditionally put it into this capital project. So it's become the equivalent of the reserve in RFC and RE. but we don't have an account called reserve,
And so to appropriate money out of that reserve
just be a transfer.
for us,
Yeah.
right? And what percentage of, I assume you're talking about a percentage of all the revenue we make on these railroad parking properties, right? So like, that all has to go into this fund. What percentage of that do we have to allocate to capital? Or is it,
I forget, I have to look at it every year when we put the budget together. I don't know off the top of my head. But there is, even though the leases have expired, we're still handling that as though the leases were current. Just so, we do have capital projects that are necessary at the train station, so we've been stocking up on that capital projects account.
okay.
But for now, what we're looking to close out is $175,005.62.
Do we need to vote on this?
Yes.
Yep.
So I'll accept the motion to close out $175,005.62 from the 6 projects described on the projects to close. And move, when we close those out, that would move it into the capital projects sub-account
Within the parking capital.
within the parking capital fund. So I'll take,
So moved.
Rob moves, Paul seconds, all those in favor? Unanimous. Okay, financial report, Jim?
The general fund is looking good. Still on taxes, we're about 10 basis points lower than through April of last year. Investment income, because of when this report was prepared, we didn't have April, all the April statements and everything booked, so investment income through March is about $967,000 better than budget. So again, we're still looking at that 1.2, 1.3 million projection for the current year. Town clerk, definitely seeing a slowdown in their revenues. I think will be good for this year. We did put in just under 1.8 million again for next year. I'm a little wary that we won't collect 1.8. I don't think it's gonna be a devastating drop off, but I think 1.8 might be a little optimistic for next year based on what their current collections are looking like. And then on building permits, we're doing really well. We've collected $1 million out of a $1,263,000 budget. And we had assumed 57.5 for redevelopment project permits, and to date, we have received just over 80,000. So the revenue side is looking very good. On the expenditure side for the general fund, everything's tracking as expected. We do anticipate some vacancy-related salary savings in the police department, as in prior years, but now I think they're down one just because of a recent retirement, but I think they're more fully staffed than they have been for quite a while.
Jen, on the library grant, I see that, I mean, trivially, it's $400 over budget.
Yeah, there's a, I think there's a PO that needs to be closed out on that one. They won't end the year $400 over. I think that's a workers' comp PO that needs to be closed out.
Got it.
On
Jen, legal counsel here, is that, does that include any of the costs related to Great Island, or is that being tracked separately in the capital account?
It is, the Great Island is all within the bond fund account. This is just normal town legal. On state revenues, again, as expected, what we've been looking at all year is still the same, no big changes. On page 6, 7, and 8 are our other funds that we've been tracking. So the sewer fund is looking very good. We've collected about $1 million more than we have spent, but the sewer treatment equipment line is our big number that's paid monthly. The parking fund is actually doing pretty well. Parking pay stations, That usage jumped up quite a bit in April, so we're seeing a return there, as well as in ticket revenue. We just hired a parking crew leader. I think he's starting, he may have already started. So now that they're fully staffed in the parking department, I anticipate ticket revenue will go up a bit more. So we had some concerns about that, but I think we're gonna be okay there. The rec program fund, they have taken in $1.2 million. They take in revenue ahead of time and then spend it throughout their programming season that they just collected for. So we'll see the expenditures going up quite a bit. Probably not too much change in revenue for the rest of the year. And then the final one on page 8 is that Great Island Management Fund. The $400,000 is what was appropriated about a year ago in June of 2022. And this is expected to collect the rent money and then use it for just maintenance of the property, not for any kind of projects, nothing like that, just maintaining the property, mowing the lawns, taking care of the rental units, that sort of thing. Because this just goes through April 30th, we don't show anything, but on the May report, you'll see some activity here. On our bonded projects, I did change the way we present for the projects where we issued notes, which start on page 11. If you look at Hindley and Holmes, this is how we're showing. I added a 2023 bands number. Because they're bands, they're not revenue. We can't recognize them as revenue, so they're not up above. But I wanted to be able to have you see, like on Hindley, we did a temporary borrowing of $7.5 million. We've spent $1 million, so we're good on the cash for that project right now. But you'll be able to compare what we borrowed versus what we've spent. And then ARPA starts on page 14. We already had some, oh, I'm sorry, Great Island Acquisition is on page 14. This is where you will see what we issued for Great Island and what we have spent from that bond fund. So we issued a total of just about 42.8 million through the bonds between par and premium, and 49 million in notes for a total proceeds of just under $91.8 million. And then down below, you can see how we're using those funds, what our original estimate was to tie up to the 91, or our kind of updated estimate, not our original estimate. But what the estimate is for using that 91.8, what we expended through May 10th, and what is still remaining. As we get more of a plan around that additional access and remediation costs of $6 million, we'll add more detail there once that gets fleshed out.
Jen, on things, I mean, this is small, like on the sewer assessment rebate, is that are those dollars we need to kind of transfer from general fund or bond fund to sewer fund, or no?
No, they're all part of
The netting of the purchase.
closing on the property, so it's part of the purchase of the property and needs to be accounted for in the bond funds. And the sewer fund already collected the money, which is why we're rebating a portion of it to the seller.
Got it.
And then ARPA's on page 15. So as Dan mentioned, the committee is going to be reconstituted and start looking at what changes would be warranted on the original appropriations. And I think we're going to probably discuss a closeout process for projects that are complete, because we do have a few that just have a few dollars hanging there, and we need a process to sweep those maybe into contingency and then a way to reallocate them where they're needed. But to date, we have expended $776,000. Our remaining appropriation is about 5.6. We had to report to the feds by April 30th, and it also included what we had committed, which was mostly on drainage purchase orders. It wasn't an overwhelming amount of money. But I do think that there's a little bit of urgency in moving forward on these projects because there have been, there's been proposals raised in Congress to claw back funds that haven't been committed yet. I don't know if it's gonna gain any traction, but there is talk of if people aren't moving quickly on these, should the feds pull the money back?
Committed or spent?
Committed. And their definition of committed is a little bit vague.
Go figure.
So Jen, on this report, is it possible maybe, just so we can figure this out, it sounds like you're gonna press people for which ones are done, so we can start
Yep.
closing these out, and maybe put all the ones that we've closed out, move up to the top, have a section there.
Yeah, once we have a process, we'll have a closed, completed section and an active section.
Great.
Right. And a overage,
Yes.
right, so we have a reserve.
Yeah, we have a contingency.
We have a contingency which should be growing as we close some of these out.
Exactly, but there may be some that went over a little bit and we'll
Yeah.
move from contingency to
Yeah.
do the over and unders like we do with the RFC and RE closeouts. But that's all that I have on the financial report.
All right, hold on a second. Okay.
Okay. Okay, we have 4 different meeting minutes to approve.
Let me ask one last question on the finances. Does somebody, this is strictly an accounting question, does somebody review the investment portfolio to determine whether there is any risk of collecting all of the principal and interest due us? And such that if in fact there were any concerns, a reserve would be developed.
On ARPA money?
No, I'm sorry, I'm talking about the investment portfolio
Oh,
In the general fund?
in the general fund. Or is, easy answer to that question is that there's no likelihood, no reasonable likelihood that in fact all principal and interest will in fact come in the door.
I will say that Joan does a risk assessment of each institution that she places investments with, and they're generally CDs. We have CDs and money market accounts for the most part, in addition to the T-bills and STIF, which are a little different animal. But she does monitor the institutions that she uses, and she and I have discussed with Bankwell, a program that they have that would allow us to, say we have $1 million on deposit with Bankwell. Through this program, we would actually be able to spread that out among other institutions and have multiple accounts so that they're all down below the FDIC limit.
It sounds like a wonderful idea.
Which for municipals are 500,000?
FDIC,
FDIC is about the fund?
yes, I believe so. Don't quote me on it, but I believe so.
Okay. Well, I know sounds like there's been a fair amount of activity in terms of treasury, the T-bill investments, right?
Mhm.
And we've made a bunch of them, and I think we've rolled a bunch of them.
We haven't placed any more for the last few weeks. We have a few that are maturing through June. I don't think we have any more. We might have some maturing in May, but because we're coming up to the end of the year, we didn't place any more. Joan and I are gonna come up with a laddering strategy for the first 6 months of fiscal '24 based on a cash flow projection. So we're not being overly aggressive right now at the end of the year, but we'll be able to hit the ground running for fiscal '24.
It's all good news, thank you.
Yeah. It was interesting, because of the discussions going around the debt ceiling, all of the T-bills sort of in late May were trading 150, 200 basis points lower than those in June, just because of where people had concerns. I don't know that I buy those concerns, but the market certainly.
Well, I think there's also, I've heard that depending on if the president has to invoke the 14th Amendment and what challenges there are, if we were to buy T-bills after the debt ceiling is breached, they may not even be valid if there's a successful challenge in the courts. So I don't think we want to do anything more with T-bills at the moment, just because there's some uncertainty in that
That would be
area.
calamitous.
It's an
Not
interest.
for the town, for the country.
No, I mean, it's a very interesting discussion, and I don't think we would want to take any chances on that with our money at the moment.
Well, I think if T-bills are having problems, then I think there's gonna be a lot of people below them that
It
are
all
having
goes downhill
problems.
from there.
But I think it's good that we're moving there, and I guess, obviously keep in mind if there's anything you think we need, we passed a resolution, I think, like 6 or 7 months ago, everything's, I think that's given you a lot of flexibility to.
That's given Jenna flexibility.
Yeah.
It's definitely her realm. She consults with me, but it's her decision on what those strategies are.
Okay, so in terms of the minutes, do you think,
There is one change to the minutes that Taylor caught, so we've updated it. On the March 30th minutes, the call to order, we corrected it and made Jim's last name Palin instead of Pale.
Who's that guy, Pale?
Chairman Pale.
well,
I say we leave it.
So that's already been updated for the draft minutes.
that must have due to the lack of sunlight.
Lack of
Chairman,
transparency.
he was very pale, is that?
Okay, so with that one change, I'll accept a motion to approve the minutes of March 30th, 2023, April 4th, 2023,
March 28th.
And we have a March 28th minutes in here too.
Yeah.
March 28th, 2023, and April 6th. Can I thank you?
March 28th, April, March 30th,
The agenda, I think,
April
had them.
6th is
April
down there
4th.
twice.
April 6th.
Oh,
and
sorry.
April 6th.
Yeah. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of March 28th, March 30th, April 4th, and April 6th, 2023, all regular meetings. Rob moves. Dan seconds. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Okay. I don't know, does anyone have anything material update on, in terms of special assignments or committee reports?
On Oxbridge, we met last Thursday. The academic wing remains at 99%. It's really in punch list phase, and it's occupied by students. The assembly wing, which is the gymnasium, the cafeteria, et cetera, is now at 92% construction. The building will begin accepting furniture and FFE on June 15th. And I would encourage everybody, if you're driving up Mansfield there, to swing by off hours and take a look. It's really beautiful. I took our daughter who graduated there, and she was pretty amazed at the transformation of that campus. So hopefully another couple of months, and it'll be punch list only.
Great.
I know David's out. I know there is some discussion about HHR. Maybe I'll give an extremely brief update because David has all the details here. But in connection with some of the design work that they had done, I spoke to Chris and Jill, and basically there was some work that needs to be done in some of the rooms that are surrounding the area being done, or rooms that they need to move HVAC or piping or other stuff through that's going to require them to probably tear down a couple ceilings and rebuild them. And so some of that work that's not exactly inside the envelope of what they're working on, but that's feeding utilities, may have some incremental costs. So they've basically pushed back the date by which they're going to submit the bids and the date by which they're going to receive the bids by about a month, in order to redesign the work that needs to be done to accommodate these things, and re-cost estimate it. And there's, depending on what that number comes back with, if it's more than the the cushion, if you will, that the expected grant affords, they might have to come back before us for an additional appropriation. Jill McCammon and Chris Price asked me to join, myself and Monica to join one of the building committee meetings a few weeks ago, and I think myself and Duke from the Board of Ed side and Monica all told them that they should sort of look at what needs to be done, and we should do it right. We shouldn't start trying to value engineer things just to make up for something that was sort of unknown. Let's look at, if there's additional monies, let's put it in front, let's look at it, but let's not do things that kind of cut corners or try to value engineer if it's only going to come back to bite us 2 years in the future. It's not the way that we do these projects, so I think they'll bring it all back to us. Nothing else on the chairman's report, other than to say thank you for all the work that everybody has done in connection with getting this budget passed. As you know, the RTM, small adjustment to one of the reserves, but basically passed every dollar that came down from our operating boards through us to that. Okay, I'll accept a motion to adjourn. John moves, Rob seconds, all those in favor? Unanimous. 8:58.
Thank you.